Deputy SES Commissioner Mark Morrow, appreciate the update. Let's go now to our panel this morning, the Shadow Assistant Minister for Resources, Tim Hammond, and Liberal Senator James Paterson. Gentlemen, good morning to you both. Tim, first to you, this warning from the Attorney General George Brandis that it could be the 2020s before we see legalised same-sex marriage. If you don't, Labor that is, support the plebiscite. Your response to that ahead of these talks in Brisbane later today?
Good morning, Kieran. Well, look, firstly, if invited to do so, the Labor Party is always very happy to sit down and intro discussion about any topic that the government is choosing to pursue. But the invitation to do that by the Attorney General has to be looked at in the context of this so-called warning about delay. For mine, it really is more evidence of the fact that the script about the marriage equality plebiscite appears to be increasingly written by the far right of the party in the context that if delay really was the issue, and if that was something that weighed so heavily on the Attorney General's mind, why not simply grant the members of his parliament a free vote and allow marriage equality to be legislated upon right now?
James Paterson, your response?
Well, because we took to the recent election a pretty clear promise to conduct a plebiscite on same-sex marriage as soon as possible, and we'd like to do so as early as February next year. The only thing standing in our way is Bill Shorten and the Labor Party, who, so far at least, are indicating that they have no intention of respecting our mandate on this issue, and so far at least have indicated that if necessary they're happy to delay this issue for the life of this parliament and beyond, if it means stopping a plebiscite as the means to achieving same-sex marriage.
And Tim Hammond, the debate doesn't, as you well know, it's not happening in a vacuum of the politics around it, and there's no way that Malcolm Turnbull's going to relent on this. As you and the Labor Party well know, they did take it to an election. This was part of the truce within the Liberal Party. That's the reality. If you want same-sex marriage to become a reality, surely Labor's got to compromise here. Otherwise, you know, we could be many, many years away from some action on this.
Well, again, if the trigger point to this conversation, Kieran, is delay, it just seems a very strange approach to be firing a shot across the bow in relation to the time in which it might take to make this a reality, whereas we all know it could simply happen tomorrow. The other thing about that conversation is we've already seen by individuals who have direct links to the Liberal Party where this conversation might otherwise take us in terms of the risk of hatred and division within the community in relation to a question about whose relationships are more legitimate than the others. There is a way forward in relation to all of these conversations. It's called amending the Marriage Act.
But Tim Hammond, if before I go back to James for his response to that, I want to ask you about the limbo, the ongoing limbo that those individuals would remain in for 3, 6, possibly more years, and the impact on those individuals you talk about within the LGBTI community from this debate, which would last a matter of months. Don't you have to weigh that up? The short-term difficulties of a debate, which you could counter through leadership from yourself and others in the Liberal Party as well, versus 6 years potentially or more where there's no reform here.
Well, Kieran, there's a couple of things about that too. Firstly, this so-called mandate in the context of a working majority has already been put to the test in Parliament and has been seen to be found wanting. And secondly, to the extent that this is a balancing exercise, that's right. But we can't forget the potential for hurt and harm in relation to where this conversation might go in the context of the evidence that is already in the community about harmful and damaging publications that have been made already linked to the extreme right of the Liberal Party. Again, if we're looking for leadership and we're looking for a quick and effective way through this, it's called amending the legislation and making marriage equality
Senator Paterson. Today. Okay, Senator Paterson, can you, well, it's pretty obvious that Tim Hammond supports the legalisation of same-sex marriage. Can you, let us know your position on that, and then how you believe this within the party is being managed? Is there a prospect that someone like Warren Entsch might cross the floor and you have a parliamentary vote, with someone crossing the floor? Is that a prospect which would derail the government's approach on this?
Well, Kieran, I've been on the record as in favour of same-sex marriage. In fact, for so long that I was even in favour of same-sex marriage before many in the Labor Party were, including then Prime Minister Julia Gillard and then Prime Minister Kevin Rudd. But on the question of going forward here, I think the chances of any of my colleagues crossing the floor on this issue is next to nil, because they all took to the election in a very sincere way, supporting the plebiscite, and they want to follow that through and they want to give that the best opportunity to succeed. So if Labor votes down, as it appears they're planning to do, the plebiscite in the Parliament, that will mean that there will be no other path to achieving marriage equality in this term of Parliament. And I think for those of us who do support it, that's a very sad thing. Now, I want to make sure that things like religious liberty and freedom of conscience are sufficiently catered for, and the Attorney-General will soon be releasing the draft bill to legalise same-sex marriage, and that will allow us an opportunity to examine those issues and discuss those issues. But without a mechanism like the plebiscite to achieve it, I'm afraid there won't be anything happening in this term of Parliament to achieve it.
What about the argument that the debate could become detrimental to members of the same, the LGBTI community, Senator Paterson? What do you make of that case?
Well, as we saw on the weekend, Kieran, there are some people with views that I think are outside the norm in the mainstream debate. And what will happen when people put forward those views, false, misleading claims, is that they'll be roundly condemned, as they were. I haven't seen anyone defend the pamphlet that was distributed on the weekend. People who are opposed to same-sex marriage, who do so in a very sincere way, don't want to be associated with those sorts of views, and they're very happy to call them out and to distance themselves from it because it only damages their case. So I think the burden will be on those main campaigns to keep a respectful tone, to keep the campaign within a respectful boundary, and it will only hurt their own causes if on either side they step out of those boundaries. So I think there's a very strong incentive for people to conduct this in a good and proper way, and I have faith in the Australian people and their ability to do so.
And before we go to the break, Tim Hammond, your response to that, and in the context of this question, isn't that the job of political leaders and other leaders in our community to keep a debate within a respectful discourse, that's the job of your parliamentary leadership and the Prime Minister and others for that matter?
Yeah, well, again, Kieran, there are probably three things to say about that in the context of this being a balancing act. We urge all leaders to remain above the fray in the context of engaging in division and hate speech. The problem with that in the context of what is going to be an incredibly expensive taxpayer-funded campaign, now to the tune of about $200 million, is that there is just simply no guarantees that we can rely upon for that to be the case in the context of what we have already seen published by those who are, as I've said again, directly linked to the Liberal Party. So, sure, it is entirely appropriate for leaders to remain above the fray. However, the problem is you cannot put this genie back in the bottle once it's been unleashed, except with, as we've already suggested and as our position has been made very clear, an amendment to the Marriage Act to make marriage equality a reality.
Let's take a quick break. Back in just a moment with Tim Hammond and Senator James Paterson.
It's your first day on the job. Everything around you is new and unfamiliar. You've spent your entire life waiting for... No? Okay. You've waited your whole life for...
Okay, seriously. What's going on here? It's different text every time. It's different! It's different again! Look! This is insane! I'm done. I'm out. What?
Saw Rose yesterday. How is she? She's lost without John. And she's got no idea how she's going to pay for his funeral.
Have you ever stopped to think about where your family would find the cash to pay for your funeral?
Didn't they have funeral insurance? No. And they're really struggling. I don't want to put my family through that. So I called Australian Seniors Insurance Agency. I answered a few questions and got immediate cover. I just told them how much cover I wanted, which can be up to $15,000, and they took care of the rest. How can you afford it? Don't premiums go up year after year? Not with Australian Seniors. With their Seniors Promise, my premiums actually drop by 5% every 5 years without reducing my cover amount. I like that.
So what's stopping you? Why wait one more day to get this sorted? One call. That's all it takes to wipe away the worry of your funeral costs. Pick up the phone and call Australian Seniors now on 1300 710 843.
At Audi, we've never been known to follow tradition. When the rest were two-wheel drive, we invented Quattro. We pioneered the aluminium revolution and turned the humble dashboard into a virtual cockpit. Everyone else is trying to keep up with us on the road, but we're already shooting for the moon. There's no point in pushing forward if you're just going the same way as everyone else. This is Audi.
Good recommendation.
So have you found a place yet?
Well, I think we might have found the one. It's perfect.
The one. We'd be happy with anything at this stage.
Oh, are you on realestate.com.au?
With twice the visits of any property site Australia-wide, if you're not on realestate.com.au, you're not in the market.
Why should you compare? Well, it's easy to do. And according to Super Ratings, CareSuper's balanced option outperformed almost all other surveyed funds over 10 years. Just go to the CareSuper website and click on the Compare My Super button. Choose your super fund and CareSuper. Then see the difference not just fees, but also investment performance have made over 10 years with the same starting balance. After that, there's only one button you'll want to click on. So compare your super and consider CareSuper today.
This is AIM Agenda. With me this morning, Liberal Senator James Paterson, and Labor frontbencher Tim Hammond. Let's look at the debate around welfare. Senator Paterson, first to you. Alan Tudge this morning, front page of The Australian, the Assistant Social Services Minister talking about, Human Services Minister I should say, talking about the suggestion by one community leader in Mount Druitt, Western Sydney, saying that they want at that level, at the program level, have the capacity to pull payments from welfare recipients who don't necessarily show up at back-to-work programs. Your reflections on that, but also the broader debate right now led by Christian Porter. It looks like the government trying to think outside the square when it comes to dealing with entrenched welfare in the community.
Yeah, I'm really excited about the potential for improving people's lives through this program of welfare reform. It's based on three things, Kieran. One is the McClure report, the most comprehensive look into welfare reform in recent decades. Two is the New Zealand model of early intervention and investment. And number three is kind of groundbreaking new research by PwC, which allows us to firstly calculate the lifetime cost of welfare, but even more importantly, allows us to drill down into those small segments of the welfare system that make up a disproportionate burden on the system and who are likely to be in the system for a very long period of time to the great detriment to themselves. The most important reason for reforming the welfare system is not that there may be budget dividends from doing so, but that people's lives can be really improved from it. We know all the research shows that if you are on welfare, particularly for a long period of time, particularly if it's intergenerational welfare, that on all outcomes your life is going to be worse. You're going to have poorer health, you're going to be less connected to your community, your family life is going to be less superior. I mean, it is really clear that we can improve people's lives. So ideas like the one that Alan Tudge has floated today that has been suggested to him, I think need to be looked at very closely and very seriously. And anything we can do to get these people, particularly young carers, young students who are on welfare, off welfare and into the work system is a real improvement to their lives.
And Tim Hammond, the point that Senator Paterson made there was similar to that made by Christian Porter last week at the Press Club, that this isn't about the bottom line so much as it is about trying to make an improvement to the lives of individuals who otherwise would be stuck on welfare for their entire productive future. It is a tragedy in so many cases. If you can get in early, like the New Zealand program is achieving, that makes a lot of sense, doesn't it?
Look, I think it'd be fair to say, Kieran, that all of us certainly enter parliamentary life with the goal of trying to do our bit to improve outcomes for those in the community, and particularly families who are suffering from challenging starts in life and certainly challenging circumstances and faced with some real barriers in order to try and maintain a reasonable and prosperous standard of living. This is an early days in the conversation, and it's important that we're having the conversation, but there are a couple of things that need to be unpicked about that. Firstly, We would be very concerned to the extent that any changes being made to the current welfare system involved taking cuts or depriving people of their entitlements to which they are legitimately, should be legitimately able to access. What we also saw in the context of today's stories is this proposition of actually depriving those on New Start from any form of allowance at all, having come down from 6 months but still at a month. What this realistically means is that young people who are looking to get a real start will be forced to exist on nothing for up to a month. What we've seen going into the course of the election campaign and before that is a history of attacking these issues on behalf of the Conservatives by cutting things out of the system. Now, that's never been the answer in relation to improving outcomes. Improving outcomes means early interventions, that's right, but really early interventions in the context of education. Early interventions in the context that kids and families get access to reskilling, training and proper education, leading to outcomes which hopefully will put them on a path to a more prosperous future.
And Senator Paterson, is that the sort of thing that you envisage the government looking at, that those sorts of programs that Tim Hammond refers to in terms of that intervention? Because the minister wasn't being prescriptive last week, essentially saying that the government was open to suggestions on this, but that early intervention, that the sort of thing that Tim Hammond's talking about there makes sense?
That's right, Kieran. We are open-minded, and that's part of what the $96 million Try, Test and Learn fund is about, is testing ideas because we don't know what works, rigorously measuring them and seeing if they're effective. But I want to take up another point that Tim raised, which is this 4-week waiting period for young New Start applicants. It sounds harsh, it sounds firm, but it is actually really important because what we know is about a young person who leaves formal education, whether it's high school or another form of education, and goes immediately into the welfare system. Now, their chances of getting out of that welfare system is immediately diminished. All the data shows and the New Zealand evidence shows that one of the worst things for a young person is go straight from education into welfare. So delaying the access to New Start by just 4 weeks, which is a short period of time, gives them the best opportunity and the most incentive possible to never enter into the welfare system in the first place. And if we can prevent them going in at that point, then their life is going to be much better. If we can get them into work at that point, then their life's going to be much better. So the amount of money saved here is trivial in terms of the lifetime cost of the welfare system in the trillions of dollars. We're talking about a chicken feed here. This is actually about improving people's lives and preventing them to getting into that cycle of dependence on welfare, which is just crucial.
And one of the suggestions here, as I mentioned at the start of our discussion on this, Tim Hammond, came from a community leader in Western Sydney saying that at that level they wanted the capacity to have a bit of a carrot and stick with those participants, to encourage them to stick at it with the Back to Work program.
A couple of things about that too, Kieran. Firstly, it's all very well and good to make sure that the proper incentives are in place in terms of those who are seeking to find jobs and improve lives in the context of trying to lift themselves out of a challenging system upon which welfare is currently an option or an entitlement or an allowance. But where is the check and balance around that? Who's to say that the method of denying entitlements will be appropriately measured out? And just picking up something that James mentioned, the context of living off nothing for a month might sound like a short time, I think he said, but the reality is to have no form of income whatsoever for a month, I'd suggest, is a very long time indeed if it is that you're caught in the middle of it. So again, the conversation is an important conversation to have in relation to investing in education, but investing properly in outcomes which will see families and kids lift themselves off a welfare cycle and into meaningful employment. But the answers come back to education. The answer is not denying someone a benefit or an entitlement for a whole month.
Labor frontbencher Tim Hammond, Liberal Senator James Paterson. Gentlemen, appreciate your time this Monday morning. We'll talk to you soon. A quick break, back in just a moment.